สวัสดีครับ I'm Point from ค้นพบ Today I want to talk about how to deal with anxiety and how to deal with worry. Now first of all, I have to be honest here that this is a topic and issue that I myself have struggled with a lot in the past. As a matter of fact, I still struggle with this today. But I think it's an important topic to talk about because most of us can probably relate to this. Most people, if not everybody, has had to deal with and face anxiety and worry one time or another, in one form or another, in one shape or another, right? But before we begin to dive into this issue and find how to deal with it, find ways to address it, I think it's really useful to examine the processes that lead us to be stuck in the rabbit hole of worry and anxiety. In other words, what's the mechanism at play here? So first of all, what usually happens is this. Before we begin to worry or feel anxious, what happens is a thought usually pops up in our mind. That thought is projecting some image or some conceptualization about a future event. Now the thought doesn't stop there. A second thought comes in. A third thought comes in, a fourth one. Before you know it, it becomes a chain of thoughts and it becomes a runaway train. It's like a river that's flowing so strongly that you just get completely swept by it. It grips you completely. And from your perspective, in that moment of time, it just feels all too real, correct? I mean, from our perspective, in that time, we can't even tell the difference between what's actually real and what's just a chain of thoughts. So that's interesting observation number one. So when we get stuck in this rut, we are reacting to these thoughts rather than observing them objectively. So this leads to psychological reactions such as feeling dread, feeling anxiety, worry, perhaps anger, even feeling upset and even fear. Now these things are interrelated, of course, but we can also have physical reactions such as our stomach that churns, or we may feel like our heart is sinking, a weakness in the knees, a weakness in the legs, you name it, right? We just feel so weak, we just feel so tired, we just feel like hopeless, and we just have a physical reaction where we just feel so drained, our energy just feels so drained. Now this can also lead to behavior responses such as avoiding people, avoiding situations, or even lashing out at the ones around us, which I'm sure that we don't want to do this anymore, right? But this is one possible and even common response pattern. And another one that's common is overeating as a way to, to deal with the stress from the anxiety. So the chain is not complete. You're stuck in a rut, you begin to worry and feel anxious, and the cycle repeats itself. You feed more thoughts into it that are often towards the spectrum of negativity, feeling bleak, hopeless thoughts that only feed into the cycle. And it just feels all too real. How will we ever escape? Now, notice here that oftentimes, because of the beginning chain of events that happen, the chain of thoughts, it therefore means that it's just nothing more than a conceptualization of our mind. We are projecting an imaginary scenario about the future, which number one, it hasn't come yet. Number two, is often exaggerated, and an exaggerated version of what could be a possibility. Now, this means that the logic used by the mind is often one of a slippery slope. A leads to B, leads to C, D, E, F, G, even though those things in and of itself are not related. But the mind tries to project a correlation and connection between them because it's trying to exaggerate, right? Obviously, you can relate to this by the common things that you may worry about, right? The classic ones. Worry about our job, our career, right? Financial stability, financial security, worried about our family safety, our romantic relationships, our health, the presentation at work that we have to give next week, the examination at the university that we have to take tomorrow. You name it, the list goes on. So with this cycle, where can we address the issue and where can we tackle it to break free from this chain? You can probably begin to guess where I'm about to go here. And the answer lies in self-observation and self-awareness in order to break free and remove yourself from the cycle of thinking that leads you to be stuck in the rut of worry, anxiety, and fear. Now, granted, it is much easier said than done, but we have to begin somewhere, correct? But before we talk about that, I want to also examine a bit more that oftentimes these thoughts, right? We often think that we have to worry because if we don't worry, how can we take action? That may be true, but you often will take action to solve the problem in a way that's not constructive and at a way that comes at the cost of your mental well-being, the cost of your happiness. What I want to propose in today's video is if we can better be self-aware of the mechanisms at play here, then we can therefore come from a place of presence, meaning that we're more aware of ourselves, so we can take actions more cautiously, more wisely, so that we don't, take actions to solve the problem that come at the expense of our mental well-being and our happiness. That's the key insight here. And therefore, we're actually even more productive and constructive in solving the issue. One more thing to notice is that oftentimes these projections that we do, these worries or anxieties about some future doomsday scenario, right? Oh, we're gonna fail the examination. Oh, my presentation is gonna be so horrible. My boss is gonna demote me. My boss is gonna fire me. Oh, my family is gonna, worry about me. Oh, my wife or my husband is gonna leave me, etc., etc., etc. Oftentimes, they don't manifest. They never manifest. And even if they do, we will often realize, if we self-reflect objectively, we'll often realize that actually, even though they do manifest, they are not as bad as we often feared initially. And actually, when they do manifest, we can actually take action steps to solve the problem or to mitigate the problem, to reduce the problem, right? Whereas, if we're living in the thought chains that produce worry and anxiety, we can never solve them because we are at its grip entirely. We're swept away by this current entirely, and we're just helpless, swimming by ourselves in the ocean, so to say, right? So that's one thing I want to present here before we dive into the steps to remove yourself from being caught in the thought's grip, being caught and identified with these thoughts such that they feel all too real. Here's what I want to propose, this thought experiment, to really get you to see that this is actually nothing more than a trick or an illusion that your mind plays on itself unwittingly. It's really interesting, so follow along with me here. Imagine the last time you felt anxiety or really, really worried about something, Probably you felt that somewhere in the comfort of your home or at the office, right? In some room, say your living room or say your bedroom, right? But from your perspective, in that moment of time, when you're sitting there in a chair, for example, and worried about this and, feeling so anxious and so neurotic about this whole thing in your mind, right? In that moment of time, you feel like it's so real and you feel like, therefore, there's this sense of imminent threat. There's an immediate danger. So you need to respond with critical alertness and respond to the situation in that matter. But also notice that in that moment, the room becomes like your jail cell, so to say. Essentially, you suffer in the room. Everything you look around in the room, the beautiful decorations that you have, the walls, the other chairs, the other tables, etc., they become this bleak, hopeless picture for you. And they become threatening in that sense. They become displeasing, right? So your room becomes your jail cell. But now imagine another situation when you're not caught in this chain and cycle of worry and anxiety and fear. Imagine, you're sitting in a room, you're probably feeling what? You feel more at calm, more at peace, and probably more happy in that moment of time, right? Now notice that the very same room, in that moment of time when you're not caught in worry or anxiety, there's no sense of immediate threat. There's no sense of imminent danger. There's no sense that you need to react with critical alertness and critical awareness, critical response, right? And in that moment, the room isn't a jail cell, so to say. Quote unquote, you're not suffering there. You know, the decorations seem more beautiful, they seem more pleasant, they seem more uplifting. The chairs, the way the tables are arranged, they seem more pleasing to your eye, right? But notice that in both situations, when you were worried and when you were happy, the room never changed one bit. Reality never changed one bit. That's the key. Reality never changed one bit. What changed was your perception between those two different moments. So you can begin to see that it's almost as if your mind flips the switch, that from one moment you can literally feel pretty at peace and calm, and the next moment you begin to suffer and go down on this slippery slope of suffering and feeling really bleak and hopeless for the future. So that's a really interesting thing to observe. It really shows you and gets, I think this thought experiment gets you to self-reflect and see that, hey, there's something going on in the mind here that gets me stuck in that rabbit hole. Now, if this suffering is caused by the mind, then therefore there must be something that we can do to address the issue, because it's not reality, it's caused by the mind. This realization leads us to another realization that if you really think about it, you are only able to feel worry and only able to feel anxiety when you're living in the future, when you're stuck living in the future, thinking about the future, and therefore you lose touch with your presence. You lose touch with the present moment. You lose touch with what's actually the reality that's right in front of you, your present experience, right? So that's a key insight also to realize. Okay, so obviously the key to addressing this issue is to self-reflect, self-observe, and bring awareness into it so you can break free from the chain, which requires our willingness to face our emotions, to confront our emotions, to accept our emotions without judging it. Do not self-judge yourself for having those emotions. Only then can we begin to escape from this cycle. Because once you've confronted it, accepted it, you have essentially identified the emotions that cause you to be stuck in this rut. Once you identify your emotions, you can begin to self-observe objectively and think about the thought patterns, the particular thought patterns and thought processes, the thinking habits that you like to employ that leads you to get stuck in that position of worry and anxiety, right? Only through that, then do you have a chance to make the conscious decision to step out from the chain of thinking, to step out from the grip of the thought patterns that lead you to feel anxious. Of course, again, easier said than done. So to look at this from the perspective of actually practicing this and getting out of the rut, I want to divide this into three main stages. So stage number one, you're completely gripped by this emotion of anxiety and worry, and you're not even aware of what's going on in your mind. You're not even aware of the thought processes that lead you to feel this feeling, this emotion. You're completely gripped by it, you're completely identified by it, such that you can't tell the difference between those thoughts and reality. It's just all too real for you. Of course, in that stage, we're not going to be able to remove ourselves from it or cut from the chain, break the chain. In stage number 2, yeah, there's some sense of awareness there. We sort of realize that in a sense it's our own thinking that produces that worry and anxiety. And so in a sense the mind is sort of tormenting itself. But still, it's just way too strong. It's like the current is way too strong. I still can't summon the attention or the awareness, so to say, to remove myself from being, attached to that thinking pattern. I still can't bring myself to step out of those thinking patterns and thinking habits. But see, we're making progress here because awareness is beginning to come in and be present in the equation of this whole conundrum. Stage number 3. In that moment, perhaps we have a break in the negative intensity of the emotion, or the awareness is strong enough. We are self-aware that our thought processes are produced, and then that leads to the emotions of anxiety that we have, and therefore we observe what's going on within our own psyche, and we choose to make the conscious choice to step out of that chain. And that's where escape is possible. That's where we want to be at. That's where we have a chance to escape from this cycle and break free from anxiety and worry. Now, granted, even if we break free, we have to also be aware of another trap that often happens, because the mind is inherently so tricky and self-deceptive in nature. What happens is, even if we break free, there is a possibility that the mind, after you have a moment of calmness and peace, the mind will still try to lure you in through other thought forms, right? That's so really, really tricky and really, really magnificent if you look at it that way, in the way that the mind works. So it's going to try to lure you back in to the thinking patterns to get you to worry about the future, because the mind thinks to itself, come on, we have to think, come on, think with me, that thing is important to worry about, come on, there are plenty of reasons why we should worry about this. So do be careful of that trap there. Alright, so the 3 stages that I just laid out. Again, as I mentioned before, self-observation. I think one thing that we can do on a practical level is when we're feeling some sense of calm, or when we're not gripped in this, in this chain of worry and anxiety, when we're just having a good time, have some time before we end the day, before we sleep, before we rest, take time to really self-reflect and self-observe, to learn about yourself, to observe and reflect upon the last time you felt worry, the last time you felt anxious, and think about the emotions that came up. And also contemplate on the thought processes that lead you to experience that emotion. The key of this exercise is to get you to be familiar with the reference point, to have some sort of reference point, so that next time when you're about to be gripped in that cycle, you at least can identify the patterns that are leading you to go down that road. But again, just thinking about it and conceptualizing about it is not going to be enough, because this has to do with awareness work. To truly escape the chain requires awareness of what our mind is doing to ourselves. That's the key here. And then the next step is, after having some sort of self-observation and a reference point from which we can remind ourselves to see objectively what's going on here, next time you get stuck in the rut, try to listen to your emotion. Of course, this requires confronting it, as I said, but try to listen to what the emotion is saying. Objectively, as if you are a third party observing your own self, observing your own emotions. The reason why this works, in a sense, you're anchoring yourself away from the current of thoughts and emotions. You're just trying to observe and make sense of where you're at. Then, from that, you can see the thought patterns that lead you to be stuck in a rut, and you can tell yourself, I'm back here again. This is the same place I'm used to knowing. I've been here often, and I can break free from it because now I'm aware of it. The key is, the final stage is to break free. It requires bringing our attention back to presence, because as I mentioned, obviously you can see that worry and anxiety can therefore only live in the future. A conceptualization or an imagination about the future, that's the key insight. You're lost, stuck in that chain of thoughts. So to escape truly, the final step is to bring your attention back to presence. After you have identified your emotions and the thought patterns that led to those emotions, try to bring your attention back to your actual present experience. What's there right in front of you? What is right in front of your very eyes? Or focus on your bodily sensations. Say they're focusing on your breathing. Breathe in, breathe out. The reason why it works is because we are diverting our attention away from those thoughts that lead to worry and anxiety and bringing them to focus on something that's actually really tangible, which is your present experience, your breath, or what's right in front of you. That's the key to this escape. Again, this is easier said than done, and as I said in the beginning, I still struggle with this too, but this requires deliberate practice again and again and again and again. Be consistent and deliberate in your practice in self-observation, self-reflection, and in trying to understand your emotions and your thought patterns that lead to those emotions. That is where we can begin on a practical level. So please do be patient with this work. It requires time, and in the beginning, it is going to be hard. In the beginning, we're going to be in stage number 1, where we're just not even aware of what's going on, right? But as you begin to practice, you move to stage 2, you're sort of aware of it, but you still can't escape. Then you can begin, through more practice, to stage number 3. And through that, with the amount of attention and alertness that you have, you can actually consciously make a decision to step out of the cycle. One last thing I want to leave before we end the clip is, if you're in stage 1 or stage 2, and of course, different things that we worry about and feel anxious about, they're different in intensity. So it's normal to be in stage 1 for one thing that you're worried about and easily be in stage 3 for something else. But if you find yourself completely gripped by it and unable to remove yourself from the situation, what I found that was helpful for me was to divert your attention to do something that's productive. Again, this does require emotional effort, and it is challenging if we're feeling anxiety in that moment. But when we do something productive, say clean your house, clean your room, or do some cooking, or help other people, what that does is it gives our brain or our mind an opportunity to experience a positive emotion. And we can use that as a wave, ride on that wave, ride on the positive emotion to come back and focus on this awareness work, self-observation, self-examination, and awareness to truly address the issue and to escape this cycle of worry and anxiety. Okay, I think I've gone on very long today. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave in the comments what you think about this video, what you found most insightful, and share your experiences with me. I also want to hear how you deal with anxiety and worry. And please like the video if you thought it was valuable. Please share the video for me. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're on YouTube and hit the bell notification button for more. Or like my Facebook page if you're watching on Facebook. So that's Konpop on Facebook. Thanks very much for watching. Good luck on your practice. Again, final note is this entire work is really counterintuitive. The whole irony of the situation is we often think to ourselves that the way to solve anxiety and worry is to sort of turn your back on it, to divert your attention somewhere else. Take your mind off it, entertain yourself, distract yourself, run away from it. But the counterintuitive move is to confront it. Because when we confront it, when we accept it, when we face it, when we set these emotions and thought patterns aside one by one, they will disappear, they will evaporate away. But if we run away from them, they will follow us and grow even bigger. So that's the whole irony of this whole mind game that we're stuck in. So I hope this was valuable for you. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time. สวัสดีครับ